So recently, after talking about Skinwalkers on PlayStation to freak people out, I've been having weird occurrences. Oftentimes, when I go out to smoke on my back porch, I can hear footsteps a lot of the time. It could just be deer, and probably is. I do live in Kentucky, which has lots of deer. But the other night, something crazy happened when I walked outside to go smoke, and I start hearing crazy noises coming from my neighbor's barn. It sounded like maybe raccoons mating, or something, or some small creature being brutally killed. I shined a spotlight over there in that general direction and didn't see anything, and didn't think much of it. So I walked to my smoke spot, and the next thing you know, I hear something that sounded extremely heavy, almost like a horse galloping, coming straight towards me, or a heavy man. I quickly turn on my spotlight, and I see a very large dog. It was either a wolf or a German shepherd. It had piercing yellow eyes, and it quickly sped past me and off into the night. That's weird, because I have never seen that dog or wolf ever before. Whenever it ran past me, the noises from the barn stopped. I know I'm not crazy either, because the neighbor's dog was going apeshit. A few nights before this, I was out buying weed at 2 in the morning on my road, and my dealer tells me somebody is walking down the road. So I get the goods, and I sit back and watch this person from behind a tree. It was just weird, because I have never seen anybody walking about this early in the morning. Just tonight, I went outside to go smoke, and I get hit with a nasty stench of rotting flesh, and a kind of nasty hermit crab smell. So I said, hell no, and went back in. I just went back out 30 minutes ago, and the stench is gone. I don't know what's going on. Do you guys think these occurrences sound like skinwalkers or some other supernatural creature? I do live in Kentucky, so I don't see how a skinwalker would be up this far northeast. So, I have a forest behind my house where a lot of weird things happen. Things such as seeing things running from behind trees. They are usually taller than I am, and I am 6 foot, and pale white in appearance, are also very fast. The forest is around 1 kilometer behind my house through a field. When I am out there, I hear weird noises such as what sounds like a person trying to sound like a big bird, even when it is the middle of winter or in the middle of the field walking back from the forest with no birds around or overhead, as it was a blizzard. Other things have happened that are kind of unexplainable, such as perfect triangles dug in the snow with no tracks leading to or from them, and all of a sudden, I will get a powerful fight or flight response. However, recently seems to have moved from the forest to my house, and one night, when I was about to fall asleep at what side of my window, which opens to the roof, I heard grunting and scratching noises on the roof. I got the same fight or flight response and jumped up to close the window. When I started to close, I heard scratching noises running towards the window, but managed to close it in time before it got there. When I hear taps and scratches such as that oftentimes afterwards, there are large amounts of time that go by without being able to account for them. For example, 20 minutes feels like 2 hours, or 2 hours feels like 20 minutes. I have investigated the area around my house and have found no reason for there to be tapping noises of any kind. Any advice or suggestions, or am I just being paranoid? First, I'd like to say that I never saw anything, and only heard something. It happened over 2 years ago. Not sure exactly when, but I think it was in February. Maybe on Valentine's Day. I was riding a bike down this road. No sidewalks unless you're in the city where I live. And I was about to get to this bridge where there's this lake pond thing. There was this house to my left. There were multiple houses on both sides of the road it was on. And around the area were more houses in rows, similar in spacing to a suburb. But there were some woods behind the houses, and further behind them was even more woods. As I was riding, I heard what sounded like a mix of maybe a cow and a woman screaming. It didn't sound like a moo scream thing exactly. I don't know why, but something about the way it sounded made me think of a cow. Although, thinking about it now, I don't really know what made me think it sounded like a cow. It was definitely animal-like, mixed with a woman's scream though. While I was writing, it only sounded like a scream. I'm not sure how I had heard it with my wind in my ears, but I had stopped to listen. Normally, I would just keep to myself and not try to save anybody. For some reason, I felt like I needed help if somebody was in trouble. I waited to see if I heard anything, and I heard the weird sounding scream this time. Once, a little bit later again, it sounded like it was roughly from the backyard area of that house or in the woods area behind it. I decided I was going to stay there a bit longer and go check it out. If I heard another scream or stop a car, if one came, and asked them to come with me or call the police since I didn't have service with the phone that was with me. It was probably 3 to 4 a.m., maybe. Super dark, so I definitely didn't want to go and help anyone, especially since if anything at all, I had a pocket knife. I didn't hear another scream. I am doubtful about it being a skinwalker. I imagine it would have tried to lure me, or more than just that. Maybe say something else, if possible. Not sure of the limitations of their voice mimicking. And it also wasn't super loud either in comparison to where it was originating from. The two screams sounded similar, but they weren't loud enough for me to say for sure. At the time, writing at night was beautiful and relaxing. Although if I knew about skinwalkers then, I probably wouldn't have went out that night alone like that. I live in the southern area of the U.S. Not sure if there's anything to be worried about living out here, or what the statistics or chances of encountering a skinwalker is. Just wondering what people's thoughts were, and if anyone agrees it probably wasn't a skinwalker. Although I don't really know what it could have been. If I did suspect it, it was a skinwalker in the situation. I would have definitely noped out of there though. Hello, my name is Caden. I am from a Navajo branch and a firm believer in skinwalkers. This is the story of how I saw a skinwalker. I was 10. I was staying with my sister, my friend, and her family during the summer. We were in Leavenworth, Washington. We drove to see her cousins. They had a huge house. It was up in the mountains and was like a log cabin. It had a large back property and even a creek with a river. I was always introverted, so I was outside while most people were inside. They had a small hanging bench about 5 feet away from the creek, and I was sitting there, lost in thought. My friend's uncle was working in their chicken coop, about 100 yards away. I snapped out of my thoughts when I heard my name being called. Her uncle didn't know my name. She never introduced us, but she said he was her uncle. He wasn't biological. He was married, her mom's sister, so my friend isn't a native. He is. His son is. I heard my name, called and looked up. I saw what I thought was a buck in the woods staring at me. Why is it staring at me? I thought. I waved at it for my own entertainment, but felt chills when it smiled at me. Its teeth were rotted and human-like. As I looked into its eyes, a foul stench filled the air. The thing had glowing eyes. It smelled like pot and decaying body. It stood on its hind legs. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. It had flesh missing in some places missing fur. My name was called again. I noticed that it came from the direction of the thing. I took a step forwards and was now about 75 yards from me. It took another step forward, and it screamed. Her uncle had a hunting rifle hanging up in a shed, which was next to the coop. He grabbed it and ran over to me. I looked at him as he looked at it. He raised the gun and shot. The thing ran off, and he asked if I knew what that was. I asked if it was a buck, and he said no. It's a skinwalker. They are dangerous and can harm you. Do not ever go near one. If you see one again, understand? He asked, and I nodded, and we walked back. Do not speak of this, he said before returning to the coop. About 30 minutes later, we left. I swear, On the dark, empty road back to her house, I saw the same glowing eyes staring back at me. This is a personal story and experience. Let me start by providing a few details to establish the backstory. I have contemplated whether or not to reveal this story since the day it happened. According to Navajo kinship, your cousins are legitimately considered your sisters and brothers, depending on their gender, of course. So, forgive me if the term cousin brother seems a bit janky. I grew up next door to my cousin brother, who was less than a year my senior. We did everything together. In high school, he became a popular basketball player, but mediocre academic. You know that old song and dance? He was a light-skinned Navajo, clear complexion, athletic, very handsome and popular, etc. I was enrolled into kindergarten a year after he was due, my late birth date, making him a junior, 11th grade, and myself a sophomore, 10th grade when the story occurred. If you come from the res, you know how important basketball is. You're basically a celebrity. Going to high school on a dry res usually meant that getting alcohol was very, very difficult. So, even in high school parties were very limited in terms of alcohol consumption, meaning no one built up a strong alcohol tolerance. Everybody was a lightweight because the drinking was infrequent, and even when alcohol was available, you had to return to your parents' home, so most people stayed relatively sober. Our older sister was attending university off the res and invited both us brothers out for her upcoming spring break. Our spring break was 2 weeks, and during our second week of break, her spring break would commence. Therefore, during our 2-week visit to her campus apartment, she was in class the first week, leaving us to our own devices. He quickly made friends with some people our sister introduced him to, and began going to parties almost every night. I went to a few, but left early on most occasions. I didn't drink or smoke during high school. One day, while my sister was in class, I slept past 1 p.m. Being a teenage boy, it wasn't hard, and my brother stumbled into the apartment from the party he attended the night before. He was very intoxicated. The kind of heavily intoxicated that you can smell the alcohol coming out of his pores, and the smell of alcohol lifting off his bad breath and clothes. He finds a handle of vodka that was chilling in the fridge and begins drinking that. It isn't long before he is crying and having a complete meltdown. To this day, I still get chills thinking about what came out of his mouth that late afternoon. He was basically crying and almost incoherent, but was adamant that he needed to get something off of his chest and confess something. I'm there listening, but still a bit annoyed because I was left to babysit him. I figured he was going to say he was cheating on his girlfriend, or got arrested last night, or something frivolous. This is not verbatim what he said, but the gist of his confession. He begins to confess that he is a skinwalker. I tell him to shut up and that he's just messed up. He gets angry because I am not listening correctly. His angry outburst spurs me to longer interference and to just listen to what he has to say. He repeats himself and says, "I am a skinwalker. I killed my paternal grandmother." He continues to say that around the time we were in junior high, which is 7th and 8th grade, is when he began practicing bad medicine to become a skinwalker. I don't remember if I asked for an explanation in pure disbelief or what, but he continues to say that one summer evening, when he was out after dark shooting hoops alone, a skinwalker was watching him from the roof of an empty hogan. By empty hogan, I mean a vacant hogan, uninhabited by any family members, but was centrally located and used solely for ceremonial purposes. Blessing way ceremonies, prayers, and puberty ceremonies, aka good medicine. Under the one streetlight, the stage is set. The ball ricochets off the rim and rolls past the hogan. He runs after it frantically, trying to pick up the basketball before it rolls into bullhead stickers. He said it was then that he noticed he was being watched. He said he saw the man. He said man with no further inclination of a name, or who the man was in relation to him, crouched on all fours, and then crawling around the Hogan roof following him. The man offers to teach him to become powerful and successful just like him. I can only summarize that being young and impressionable without thinking of consequence is what launched him down a path of bad medicine. He stumbles over his own words and key details. He then admits that there is an irrefutable trade. Someone he loved dearly must be sacrificed or exchanged for power. At some point, he looks me in the eyes and says something to the effect of, "Didn't you ever notice as kids I was always missing a lot or not around?" He confides in me that the man, his Skinwalker teacher, would come during the night and take him away to teach him. To where, I have no clue. He never said. I refute his claim. At the risk of him having another angry outburst, I was trying to keep his volume low because I didn't want the campus security to show up and our sister to get in trouble, that he murdered his paternal grandmother. She was killed in a vehicular accident. A semi-truck hit her vehicle straight on. She died instantly. I tell him it was an accident. He said him and his teacher performed evil chants and bad medicine, causing the accident to happen. That was his final test and subsequent initiation. I believe during all this, he was blacked out. He passes out eventually before my sister returns. I never tell her. We leave him in the apartment and go hang out with her friends. He wakes up the next day, not remembering anything and acting like nothing ever happened. Growing up traditional, I was told all my life that by elders and my parents, who were told by medicine men that if a skinwalker reveals their identity or their identity becomes known, they will get sick and die. This thought haunted my mind for a long time after this. I believed that my cousin would get terminally ill or become a fatality in a car accident for revealing everything he revealed. To be honest, I thought that his Skinwalker pack or clan, or whatever you want to call them, would retaliate and start casting bad medicine on me for even knowing. Weeks become months, and months become years. Nothing happens. To this day, my cousin's brother is healthy and still handsome with a small family of his own. We aren't as close anymore. I wouldn't say estranged because there was no falling out or bad blood. I went to college and came back a different person. Why didn't anything happen to him? Maybe he was lying, but why would his story be as detailed as it was, even as a blacked out drunk? Why would a normal person want to admit to killing their loved one? I don't know the answer to any of these questions. I heard this story from my sister's coworker and trusted friend of many years. They've known each other since kindergarten. In small rural reservation communities, it is not uncommon to know somebody throughout your lifetime due to limited choices of schools. You basically go to school with the same generation of kids from kindergarten until you graduate high school. This story isn't as detailed or in-depth as many other stories that people have shared with me, because my sister's friend explained it very nonchalantly and quickly in passing. Anyway, my sister tells her friend to tell the story to me. It takes her a moment of contemplation to share it. She said that her cousins, who are twin brothers, were always fearless ever since they were kids. They were hard to scare and would never cry or show emotion as far back as she could remember. She continued to say that they would always play freeze tag and kick the can outside after the sun went down, even though their grandma would tell them not to. They would spend the night on the trampoline with no tent, just sleeping bags during the summer. They live out towards Spider Rock when the pavement turns to dirt road. That dirt road becomes Three Turkey and eventually Old Sawmill Road. For a few weeks, something kept coming up into the family's property, causing the dogs to howl and bark and the cattle and sheep to get flustered and frantic. It started to get the brothers annoyed and territorial, to say the least. She said they fashioned a sort of tactical weighted netting out of the wires and heavy lead pipes. One of the nights, the brothers decide to wait up and stake out whatever has been harassing their animals and property. She said they prepare themselves by taking bitter herb medicine and rubbing black ash from a ceremony fire on the top of their heads. They situated themselves above the sheep shed, giving them the best vantage point, allowing for the weighted netting to fall directly on top. They didn't have to wait long. Near the property line, hopping like a frog out of a cedar tree and sagebrush, came the Skinwalker with a thud, thud, thud in the soft dirt. They waited quietly as the dogs barked and stayed in front of the doorway to the house. They said it hopped like a disjointed frog or some kind of animal they never saw in the wild. Soon enough, it made its way towards the sheep corral. The sheep got frightened and gathered on the far side of the corral, the furthest point in the entrapped space away from the Skinwalker. At this point, she said bluntly and matter-of-factly, then they threw the netting down on top of it and captured it. They jumped down on top of it as well. No weird inhuman screams or shills, just a very human man yelling for them to let him go in Navajo. She said that they told her the Skinwalker smelled like roadkill or rotting grease. She said they called the Navajo Nation police and stayed with the entrapped Skinwalker until the unit arrived, which on the res was a while. The cops loaded the putrid-smelling culprit into the back of the police SUV. The entire time, the culprit was just screaming to let him go home, and he didn't do anything. The cops were Navajo and realized upon arriving what the person was based solely on, how the person was dressed and smelling. Dressed in tattered furs and rotten grease and black paint smeared all over their body. I asked then what happened. She said the cops drove away with the person and told the family they were going to do a full write-up and all that kind of protocol. However, the family never received a copy of the case or case number in the mail, like the cops assured them that they would. I asked her then what. She said I don't know what happened after that. She supposed they held the suspect in the drunk tank away from everyone and released them with all the other drunkards in the next morning. I can't exactly say I've always been a believer in Skinwalkers. My dad used to talk about them and how he believed in them, but I always thought it was silly. Tonight, that changed, however. I snuck out of my house to go out on a walk. It was about 2 a.m., and my parents didn't know. It was mildly peaceful. I'm not very much afraid of the dark, so I don't get anxious from these walks. It's windy tonight, so there were a lot of loud noises. I got far from my house where there is a large stretch of woods. It's an area where we don't usually see deer because it's close to a highway. It's southern Maryland, so it's usually foxes and birds at best. I inspected the woods and had the most terrifying and blood-curdling fear when I saw what I can really only describe as a skinny, disfigured silhouette with antlers, but not like a big deer. They were small. It stood tall and is unlike anything I've ever seen. I can't even comprehend what I've seen. I don't know if it could have been real. Within 10 seconds of seeing, I took off running and I couldn't think of anything else to do. I ran fast, not looking back. I was so terrified. I ran through my neighbor's yard to get home faster. I don't know how to feel about it. I don't know if I'm overreacting and I just saw a deer or something, but I don't know if I can sleep. I'm constantly looking outside and now terrified. I have believed in Skinwalkers most of my life, and I'm confident I've seen a Skinwalker 2 times. I grew up spending a lot of time in southwest Colorado by the Four Corners, where there are Navajo and Ute Indian reservations. In the small town of Cortez, which is a non-res, there is a story known by locals about this place called Skinwalker Lane. It's this old dirt road just outside of the reservation that leads to an old abandoned cabin. The cabin is decades old and is said to have been built unrightfully on Indian burial grounds by white men. As the story goes, a white family lived there and disappeared mysteriously. As a couple of dumb teenagers, Me and a few of my cousins didn't believe in what we thought was a hoax, Skinwalker Lane, and wanted to go check it out. We all piled into our old Jeep SUV and drove all the way out to Skinwalker Lane at about 11 p.m. when it was pitch black outside. The sky was lit up from the moon, and you could make out the peaks of Sleeping Ute Mountain in the distance and the edges of the willows which lined either side of Skinwalker Lane. As we slowly eased down the road, the car got quiet, and we all had a weird feeling. Deer in groups of 2 or 3 kept poking their heads out of the willows and just stared at us without caution. I thought this was especially weird because deer are usually jumpy creatures. After about 1.5 miles of this road, we finally get to this clearing which opened up to a big field. At the other end of the field, you could see the old cabin. At this point, we were creeped out and reluctantly continued across the lightly used road until we were about 150 feet from the cabin. The cabin was very dark, the wood rotted, and there were weird carvings all over it that looked like some sort of tribal symbolism. We decided to just sit and look at it for a while to see if anything happened. We were too scared to walk up to it. Out of nowhere, this shrill, skin-peeling howl came out of nowhere. It was a long howl, but by the time it had ended, it changed and sounded more like a man screaming. From the left side, something on 2 feet ran heavy-footed behind the cabin. But on the other side came out an enormous coyote that looked similar to a wolf in size. The coyote just stood and stared us down, eyes glowing a deep blood red. We were so freaked out and drove out of there immediately. I will always believe in skinwalkers after that night. This story was told to me by my brother. It occurred during the early 2000s. Smartphones had not yet been invented, only shitty flip phones with sketchy cellular service. My brother was an electrician, a journeyman. He was employed in a smaller border town called Gallup, New Mexico. Gallup is situated on the cusp of the Navajo Nation res and the area called the Checkerboard area, due to the fact that there are designated plots of land that are considered a part of the res, and the next plot of land is not, like a checkerboard. There is large population of multiple tribes in area, such as Navajo, Pueblo, etc. One night, my brother and one of his coworkers, who was Chinese American, were the only 2 employees on call, in case of emergencies. A power line goes down or something catastrophic happens like that in the middle of nowhere, outside of Gallup towards the Continental Divide. He receives the call in the early morning hours, shortly after 1 a.m. The coworker had recently become a father of a newborn, but desperately needed the hours. My brother calls him, and they agree to meet up at the company's stockyard. My brother waits about an hour or so. His coworker still hasn't shown. It is strict company protocol to never go on jobs alone, always in pairs or more, due to the hazardous nature of high voltage lines and electricity in general. My brother's coworker calls and tells him that something is wrong with the newborn and he needs to take his wife to the ER, and he'll meet up with him on site. Also, another injunction. They are strictly instructed to show up to the job site in company vehicles, which are equipped with tools required for the job and all that. My brother understands and doesn't want his coworker to be docked pay or written up for the violation of company policy. Against his better judgment, he heads out alone. The job site is quite literally in the middle of nowhere. The power lines spanning across the vast desert with red rock mesas in the far distance. In the daylight, at least. At nighttime, it is pitch black New Mexican desert. Only dirt roads and no houses or streetlights for miles. None could be seen along the entire horizon. He waits as long as he cares to wait for his coworker. He figures he'll assess the damage on his own, and by the time his coworker shows up, he'll have a solution. He suits up and begins crawling the tall wooden pole. The company truck is parked facing towards the pole. The high beams illuminated the base and subsequent foreground. He reaches the top of the pole. Some time passes as he is trying to calibrate the issue or solve the problem, the power outage. Something on the ground below him catches the corner of his peripheral. He looks down in disbelief and shock as his mind tries to make sense of what he is seeing. He described it as a man crawling on all fours, wearing the skin of a coyote. The skin draped along its back, with limbs like dead weights dangling towards the ground. He watches as the creature patrols the area. He said he witnessed the Skinwalker encircle the truck with smaller and smaller orbits, until eventually it stood up on 2 feet and peered inside the window of the truck on the driver's side. He described the motions of the Skinwalker and said it was moving as if it was confused as to what was going on, where the driver of the truck was. From his vantage point, he could infer that the Skinwalker was male, was painted with black paint and white clay. Then, on the horizon, he saw headlights. His coworker was en route. The Skinwalker also noticed this, not figuring out that he was up on the power line pole. As his partner approached closer, the Skinwalker ran off into the dark on all fours. The rest of the trouble call was uneventful in regards to the Skinwalker,